This is a video update lesson for Blueprints Visual Scripting for Unreal Engine 5, 3rd edition textbook. This is regarding Chapter 6, pages 129 to 143. So in the textbook, when originally published, it was using the old control system, which is still functional. You can actually still use that system for the project in the textbook. However, the textbook has you starting from a first-person template, and if you want to modify inside of the template to get the sprint function and the zoom function, this is how you would go about it. I'm going to try to be as clear about this as I can, but I may go a little quick, but that's okay. You can adjust the playback speeds or pause and play as you feel necessary. First thing we'll check out is adding the running function. So in the textbook, it would have you going into the first-person character blueprint in the content browser, in your blueprint folder, and look at the event graph. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. So here's my content browser, and if I go into the first-person folder, blueprints, we can see I've got BP first-person character, and let's go have a look. Now, as you can see in here, the book is expecting you to have VR controls in here, all kinds of controller controls, but the first-person character blueprints, or all character blueprints, are a lot cleaner now because they use this enhanced input action system. Okay? So the first part of the chapter normally gives you a tour on how the input system works. And now the way the template works is if we go look into our content folder, now if I go step back to the first person folder, you'll see we've got a blueprints folder as well as an input folder. And if we go check out this input folder, one of the first things we'll see here is the IMC default. Now if we check this out, inside of this we'll see a section of mapping, and we'll see quite clearly that we've got the input action jump, input action move, input action look. And if we go reference our first person character, we'll see that's exactly what's being used here. So we've got input action look, input action move, and input action jump. And then the necessary nodes come after that. So the bindings would now take place here in the IMC default. So for instance, jump, traditionally we know it to be a space bar. The move is the WASD for keyboard functions. I'm not going to look at the up-down arrows or the gamepads for this example. And the AI look, which is just grabbing our mouse axes. Okay? So this means that if we want to do a sprint function with our left shift key, we will need to do an enhanced input action similar to this. The other thing to go look at will be this action folder inside the input folder, which holds the input actions themselves. This is a way for setting up how they're going to function. So in the case of, if we go look at our jump as our reference or an example, we can see here that the event of jump has a start and a completed. You could also consider this, and the textbook would have considered this action to be pressed and released, which is now pressed or started as jump, and completed or released is stop jumping. So our sprint feature or command will be very similar to this. So what we will do, first thing we'll do is we will go and we will create an input action. So we'll right click, go to input, and we will choose an input action. We will name this IA underscore sprint. And we will double click to open it up. And inside we'll see a couple of settings here. The one that concerns us right now is the triggers setting. So we will add 2 of these triggers inside of the array element. And the first one, as I demonstrated before, will be the pressed. And the second one will be the released. Okay, once we have all of that, we are happy to go ahead and close this. All right, so let's go add our new input action of sprint to a keybind. So to do that, we're going to go back to our content browser, and we're going to open up the IMC default inside of the first person controller folder. And in here, you'll see that we already have the 3 input actions that we were using set up here, and we are going to add a new one. So we'll hit the plus key here on mappings, and we'll see here now we've got an empty one. I'll just minimize these. We can see here we got one that's listed as none, when we can very easily just grab the drop down and go find our input action sprint that we created a second ago. And now with that added, we can add our keybind, which is going to be our left shift on the keyboard. So when we get the left shift set up, we are now ready to use our input actions. We can close this now, and we can come inside of here, and we go to our content browser. We go into our actions, we grab our sprint input action, and we bring this into our blueprint inside of our first person character controller. And if we expand this arrow below here, we will see we now have a started and a completed, or a pressed and released. So in other words, this will be for when this player starts to sprint, and then of course when they release and they stop sprinting. So with that, we will need to go grab, forgive me a second, I lost my page because I'm following the book. Yeah, we're going to need to go grab the player movement speed. And for that, we will need to reference the character movement component. So that's very simple, right? So if we look inside of our components list, since we are in the first person character, we can see here we got a character movement component right here. We can drag and drop this in for our reference. And now inside of the character movement, we can see we already have our max walk speed in here. Where is it? Max walk speed right here. And there, it's the crouch speed, right? So we've got our reference to this component, which means now we can grab nodes for those. So right off of the character movement, we will go ahead and we will grab a set walk speed. Set the max walk speed. And then of course off of here, we will grab a reference for the same thing. We could just duplicate the node we already brought in if we wanted. That's fine. Okay, and again, this is so using the metrics provided by the textbook, which say to set the max walk speed to 2200. And then, of course, setting the walk speed back to the default 600 upon release. So now we just got to set up the execution nodes. So started, or when the button is pressed, we will increase our walk speed to 2200. And when completed or released, we will set that walk speed back to 600. Okay. And of course, compile and save. And that is setting up the sprint function to work with your textbook. Now, little tip here, something I recommend. If we go back into our input action for sprint, If we look at our triggers here, we'll notice that under pressed and released, we've got these 0.5 delays. Let's remove those to just 0. That way, when the player hits sprint, they will start to sprint instantly. And then the last thing to do here will be to group select all of these nodes, hit C, and add that this is our sprint. Okay. Good. So now if we compile, save, we go test this out, and our player should sprint when we hold shift. And they stop sprinting when we release. All right. So we just finished doing a sprint function for our game based on the new input action system with Unreal Engine to go for our textbook. But there's still one more step to do, and that is creating a zoom. So we want our character to be able to zoom in when we press right click. So to do that, what we're going to do is create a new input action. So again, we go into our content browser, into our first person character folder, inside of input, inside of actions, we will create a new input action input. That was a lot of saying that input word. Okay, so we add this, and of course, continuing with our naming convention, IA underscore, this one we'll call aim down sights or ADS, and we will double click to get inside of there. Now, this will function much like jump and sprint did. It'll be a press release situation. So once again, we'll go to our triggers. We'll add 2 array elements. The first one will be pressed. So when the button is pressed, it will zoom in, and then it will be released so that it will return back to our normal field of view. Okay. So of course, now that we've created the input action, we need to go back into the IMC default and create a new input map for this. So we're going to bind this. First, we'll grab our ADS, or aim down sights, and we're going to bind this to our right mouse button. Okay. Great. So we'll save, and let's go find our first person character blueprint, which should be right over here. And now we're going to make a new function for zoom. So exactly like we did before for sprint, we will go into our content browser, into our inputs folder in the action folder, and grab the new input action ADS, or aim down sights. Expand that, and we'll see we have a started and a completed. So that's our press released. And for this, we want to have a very, very smooth transition from zoom in and zoom out. And the field of view by default is set to 90. And we're going to zoom into a field of view of 45. So in order to get that looking nice and functioning smoothly, we're going to need a timeline node. So let's go off of started, and we will search for a timeline. At the very bottom, usually it will add a timeline, just like this. And we double click the timeline, which will open up a whole new tab for us that looks like this. So as I like to explain, timeline allows us to manipulate space and time, which sounds really cool when you say it that way. And it's completely accurate because what we need to do is set up 2 variables here, or not variables, but 2 values. One is the time and one is the space. So right now, by default, it's set to 5 seconds. Okay, but we need a value to hold the space. So we're going to add a track. We're going to add a float track, and we will call this our field of view. Okay, now holding the shift key, I will add a node here, and we will set this to position 0 on time and in space, because we want this to be our default field of view. And I said before our default field of view is 90. We're going to set our value to 90. So there you go, time and space. Now, the second part of our timeline is going to be the zoom in part. And we want this to take place over a certain amount of time. We don't want it to snap instantly. We want it to smoothly enter into zoom, but not too short or too long of a time though, because a shooting game, action game, we want to get that zoom in going. So we're literally going to do this over 0.3. So you can see here now our timeline has been adjusted, and we will hold shift to add a new keyframe, and the time will be the 0.3 that we added. And the value is going to be our new field of view, the space, which we are going to shrink down to 45. Now you can click these two arrows over here beside to zoom so that you can see the timeline that you've set up here. So here we are, the first frame and the second frame. And with that, we can compile and save if you want. You don't really need to. But in any case, we have our timeline here. So when the button's pressed, it will play that timeline, shrinking our field of view down from 90 to 45. And then when we release, we want the completed to reverse the animation. So returning over the same 0.3 back to a field of view of 90. Okay, so we've set up the input action and the timeline. Now we actually need to do the thing to the camera. So if we go into our components list of our first person character here, we'll see we got first person camera, and that's the reference we are going to need. It's the first person camera. And in that first person camera, you can see in our details, we can do some field of view there. So we'll pull off of this and adjust the field of view. Set field of view, right? Now in here, we could set the hard field of view if we like, but we set up this timeline and we have our float track that we made, field of view. So we can just plug that right into here. And then of course we need to update that field of view like that. Okay. And with that, we will grab everything, press C on our keyboard to add a comment. We will call this our zoom. And if we compile and save and go hit play, now we should be able to zoom in. And when we release, we zoom back out. Nice, smooth zoom in feature. Okay, so with that, that completes my quick update lesson on chapter 6, pages 129 to 143. So the end of this video should get you guys to page 143, where you will begin increasing the projectile speed, which your book will totally have you covered from this point on. So thank you so much for your patience.